Welcome back. Now we're going to take a look at the Second Continental Congress. As we do, we're going to use an event map as we did when we looked at the First Continental Congress, but this time we're going to use my iPad and that same graphic organizer event map on Notability. So as we take a closer look at what the Second Continental Congress meeting resulted in and even what the conversations like during it, we're going to use an event map similar to what we used when we learned about the First Continental Congress for that. So with thinking about looking back at what we discussed and wrote on this map for the First Continental Congress, it states that it occurred in September of 1774 in Philadelphia, and 12 of the 13 colonies had representatives join this Congress. And their purpose of joining together was to respond, to determine, that is, how to respond to the passing of the Intolerable Acts by Britain. The main representatives were Samuel Adams, George Washington, and Patrick Henry. All 12 representatives created what was known and became known as the Continental Association, which united the colonies. And as a result, they all agreed to not trade with Britain and that to meet a year later. So now it is that year later, and we're going to be looking at the Second Continental Congress. I have found a video that is in the format of a news broadcast describing the events. As we watch this together, I'm going to pause and toggle between that video and this map and jot down any information.
On May 10th, 1775, almost a month after the battles of Lexington and Concord, delegates from 12 of the 13 colonies, with Georgia to join them in July, met at Independence Hall in Philadelphia. It was to be the Second Continental Congress.
So there we go. I think it said May 10th. I'm going to review. Yeah, May 10th of 1775 in Independence Hall in Philadelphia was where and when this occurred. So I would say
The first had met a year earlier. The delegates included such notables as John and Samuel Adams of Boston, Patrick Henry and Richard Henry Lee of Virginia, and Christopher Gadsden of South Carolina, all members from the First Continental Congress. Also present were Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, both from Virginia, and Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania. John Hancock, a powerful patriotic figure and merchant from Boston, was elected as president of the Congress.
But independence was not.
right there, I noticed they listed a lot of important names of those who attended. And if I look at our map, it asks what happened, right, and who is involved. So we know that at this point, what was happening was that the delegates all met to determine the next steps in the revolution. Now, when we think about a revolution, this is that change. They're deciding that is if they want to stay peaceful with Britain or if they actually want to go to war. But the who is involved was mentioned in this video. So I'm going to actually rewind and jot those names down.
The delegates included such notables as John and Samuel Adams of Boston.
So John and Sam Adams.
Patrick Henry and Richard Henry Lee of Virginia.
Patrick Henry and Henry Lee.
And Christopher Gadsden of South Carolina.
Christopher Gadsden.
Also present were Thomas Jefferson and George Washington.
Thomas Jefferson and George Washington.
And Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania. John Hancock, a powerful patriotic figure.
Benjamin Franklin and John Hancock. Remember that they mentioned that John Hancock ended up being elected president of the Congress. I'll put that here. So now we have the what. They're trying to determine the next steps of revolution. We have the who. So let's see how the conversation went.
Year and merchant from Boston was elected as president of the Congress.
But independence was not a popular word. The only man who had the nerve to say outright in public that he was for independence was Benjamin Franklin.
Benjamin Franklin had recently returned from England, where he represented the colony of Pennsylvania in the British Parliament.
He came back from England. He gave up on the British, on any hope of persuading them to be reasonable with the Americans.
After hearing about the recent events at Lexington and Concord, Franklin concluded the only action left was independence.
When he sat down in the Continental Congress, one of the first things he said was, "I am for independence." And he proceeded that.
So I want to make sure, like, how did it happen? One of the main things that was going forward was that Ben Franklin was persuading Congress to break away from England. In search of their own independence.
To write his own Declaration of Independence, which most people don't know about. It was a very remarkable thing for him to say and do, because the rest of the Continental Congress at this point did not think they could win a war with England.
That June, following the Battle of Bunker Hill, the Continental Congress sent a petition to George III asking if he would consider working out an agreement to avoid further bloodshed. The petition was rejected.
So this is telling to me that while the event started May 10th, it continued on for some time. So I'm going to note that June, Congress sent a petition to King George. Basically asking for a compromise. But it was rejected.
So the king said, "Blows must decide who will be the ruler of this empire."
The Congress had no choice but to prepare for the coming war with England. In June, they created the Continental Army and appointed George Washington as the commander-in-chief.
So, as a result of the petition being rejected, Congress prepared for war and appointed George Washington as commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. So the last and final piece of this event map that we have to establish documenting is why was it important? So why was the Continental Congress important? If we look over all of the main events, we can state that so it secured the colonies' unified decision to go to war against Britain. So without that Second Continental Congress meeting, there wouldn't have been as collective direction heading towards an actual war.